Hey up lads, hey up loves, it's the Yorkshireman here, and today I am going to be looking at a selection of clips containing a certain man who goes by the name of James O'Brien. Now, I don't know about you, but he seems to be popping up a lot on my social media, and everybody seems to think that the words that fall from his mouth are like gold nuggets of wisdom. But I've got a slightly different opinion. And just to demonstrate this, I'm going to be showing you a few of his clips and showing you exactly why it is that I don't necessarily agree with this man. Apart from the fact that he looks like a troll with headphones on, there are some things that he says that I find to be, well, a little bit silly and quite possibly a little bit arrogant. But let's have a look, shall we?
I believe it's not about economics. It's solely about migration. And if there is a slight downturn, then that's a small price to pay for controlling your own borders and making your own laws.
So the discussion here is about immigration, all tying in with the Brexit vote that happened last year, in case you missed it. I'm sure you didn't. Everybody's still bloody well talking about it. But the immigration issue was something that certainly drove a lot of people to vote in the referendum. Mainly, it would seem, because they didn't feel like anybody was listening to them, certainly not the people in charge, whether it be in our government or in the European Union. They felt like their culture was being affected, they felt like the jobs were being affected, and just when they tried to simply talk about this, people would just dismiss them.
And when you have it explained to you that under European Union law it's perfectly permissible to deport people from other European Union countries if they fail to find work here after 3 months, or if they can't prove that they've got sufficient capital to sustain their lifestyle here. So when it's explained to you factually that the whole controlling our borders argument was utterly bogus, just go to Belgium, try and set yourself up over there without a job as a Brit, then what happens?
Well, bugger me, he's just dismissed him. Oh, well, you see, the problem is here, James, that little 3-month rule that you're talking about there, that certainly does apply to EU citizens, but the same cannot be said for people who are not EU citizens, James. And when you have it explained to you that little 3-month rule is only applicable for those 3 months, and that if somebody spends much longer here, it's a lot more difficult to remove them. They have to do something really, really bad in order for them to get kicked out. And if I could just interject, James, we're not talking about people from here going to set up in Belgium. We're talking about people coming to this country, aren't we?
I lived in Australia for a few years, and
Where?
And if I went to Australia,
Yes.
and if I wanted to go back to Australia, I would have to prove I can speak English. I would have to have a certain amount in the bank. I'd have to have medical tests. I would have to have a skill what is on a list, what they need. And why can't we apply them things here?
Yes. Well, you must have misunderstood my question. I've just told you we can. They do in Belgium, they do in Germany.
Hey, by gum, he does love talking about Belgium, doesn't he? But we're not talking about Belgium or Germany, James. We're talking about England. All of those people who turned up in Germany back in 2014 and 2015 and 2016 and 2017, did the 3-month rule apply to them as well? Or are they still possibly there? Because I think there might be a few of the locals, particularly some of the women, who might disagree with you. And were they all coming to get jobs, or were they all coming to be supported by the state? And another thing to mention is that if that system is in place where you have to prove that you've got skills, prove your medical history and all of that, if that is in place, then why oh why did Miss Angie Merkel say bollocks to that and just open the gate, effectively throwing all of those rules that you're talking about in the bin? So when people notice these inconsistencies and they have concerns about it and they want to talk about it, it's alright because according to you, it's all just bogus. Well, is it bogus or is it not, James? You tell me, because you've clearly got all the answers, haven't you, mate?
So when it's been explained to you that it was successive British governments who failed or elected not to enact European Union rules,
Yep, you're right, it's all our fault. Bollocks to Britain, James.
that are in place and enacted by other countries, so the whole control our borders argument falls to pieces. At that point, Vince Cable thinks people will be bright enough to realise they were wrong. Why is Vince Cable... What is he missing? Why aren't people bright enough to realise they were wrong when they're presented with incontrovertible evidence that the borders argument is bogus, Wayne?
God, sometimes I just want to give his cheeks a really good squeeze. Now, apart from dripping of absolute condescension when he talks to people, James seems to be missing something here. He is talking about the fact that people who voted Leave were wrong, or he's telling them, or rather, he's explaining to them that they were wrong. And then he brings Vince Cable into it, who is a well-known Ramoner, as they've come to be known. The Ramoners, the people who cannot accept the result of the referendum and are determined to do whatever they can to completely bugger it up for the people who voted Leave. Also, by talking about Vince Cable saying when people are bright enough to realise they voted wrong, seems to imply that the people who voted Leave aren't intelligent. But they're certainly intelligent enough to make up their own mind, go to the voting booth and vote for what they wanted to vote for. There seems to be this common thread of people who were pro-Remain telling the people who voted Leave that they were wrong. They turn around and tell them, oh, well, clearly you voted wrong. You should have voted how I voted, because I am right. Don't ever forget that. I, James O'Brien, am right about everything.
I believe earlier you was saying it's more about economics.
No, mate, I'm talking about all of the arguments that have been used to defend the position that you just described have been shown to be wrong. You go to Belgium.
According to you, James, according to you, they're wrong. And we're not interested in going to Belgium, James. We're talking about here.
You don't provide evidence that you've got a job. You've got 3 months at the end of which you will be removed from the country. I mean, the obvious reason, as you know, why British governments haven't done it is because it would cost a hell of a lot more to impose that policy than we would gain, because EU migrants, Wayne, as you know, are net contributors to the economy.
The fact of the matter is, James, again, we're talking mainly about migrants who are from outside of the EU, or more importantly, the illegal immigrants who are not net contributors. And that's not to say that there aren't going to be people within our own society who are not net contributors, but does it really make sense adding more fuel to the fire, or the non-fire, as it were, whether or not it was the British government who decided not to do anything, or whether it was because of the EU that we decided not to do anything? People went to this vote to make their voices heard. And the problem is, as soon as they did, people like you are refusing to listen and are shouting them down.
So once it's been explained to people, like the ones you describe, that we can control who works here and who has to leave, why do people persist in shouting the same argument?
Why do people persist in shouting the same argument? Is that a bit of the old pot calling the kettle black there, James? Well, if I could make two suggestions, one of which the reason they might keep on shouting the same argument is because people aren't listening to them, like yourself, or secondly, if people don't have all the information that you apparently seem to have, why don't you just provide it to them? And why don't you do it in a nice way and not be such a condescending dickhead when you do?
You might well be right with that.
No, I am, completely and utterly.
Ugh, I said without being a condescending dickhead, James. Right.
So once it's been shown that that's right, why do some people still say, no, that's wrong?
3 months. 3 months is too long.
3 months is too long?
Yeah.
Okay.
If they, you know...
So how are we going to cope with holidays?
God, he just can't help himself, can he? Now, you might notice that the way James O'Brien talks to his callers is it's the equivalent of putting a bag over somebody's head and then spinning them round and round in circles, pushing them and watching them as they sort of stumble around the room. The fella on the phone now starts talking about the fact that the 3 months is too long because that's what James O'Brien wants to talk about. Apparently, it's all he wants to talk about. But as soon as he does, he now starts talking about holidays. What has that got to do with controlling the borders from illegal immigrants, James?
Huh?
What if people want to come here on holiday?
Visa. If you want to go to Australia, you get a holiday visa.
And how much would it cost, do you think, to impose holiday visas on European Union countries? And what would we need to go to France?
£30 there.
What would we need to go to France?
See, this is where it all starts to break down for me. Because the guy says they should get a holiday visa. And then he starts saying, well, how much is that going to cost? He doesn't know. He's just a Joe Public. He's just an everyman. He's just calling in to voice his opinions, but you've now taken him off somewhere where you know he isn't going to be able to answer. And to be honest, James, you probably couldn't answer it either. But the fact of the matter is that you have to be in control of these conversations. And again, you're not really listening.
I don't know. I don't really want to go to France.
That's the answer, isn't it?
Yes, James, that's the answer. What's the answer, you're asking yourself? Well, I don't know. I don't think any of us know. The only thing I do know is the fella who's on the phone coughing. The only reason he's coughing is because apparently he's allergic to bullshit.
No, that's brilliant. That's the answer. I don't know whether you're being serious or not.
Oh, James, I don't know whether you're being serious or not, mate. I don't actually know whether you are seriously believing any of the things that you say or whether you are just a massive troll. And the only reason I say that is because you look like one.
But the thing,
I'm being serious. I don't want to go to France.
or Germany, or Spain, or Italy, or Greece,
No.
or Scandinavia, and that's the point. So when I say what does Vince Cable miss, he misses the existence of people like you who don't want to go to France and think that that's a political position.
It doesn't sound like much of a political position to me, James. It just sounds like he doesn't want to go to France. And if I'm right in thinking, what he was talking about was immigration and border control, but you've somehow managed to take the conversation into a place that makes no sense. Usually how you do with most of your calls. Now, if I were to chuck my 2 pennies into the pot here and talk about the indigenous British people and their attitudes towards foreigners and immigrants, I think you'd find that most people in this country wouldn't really care who was coming to live and work and study in this country, because we're a very open and tolerant people. We don't mind as long as it's all been done above board and legally. It's when you get people who are doing it illegally and people who come here who disrespect the country and disrespect the people in it and disrespect the law of the land. Again, there's a clue in the title, James. Illegal immigrants. Is it a bad thing that people want to try and re-establish a little bit of law in their own country? Is that such a bad thing? There's also the problem of people from this country who are going over to fight for terrorist groups and who are then coming back and seem to be able to get back in with no problem. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. So it isn't just about foreigners and immigrants who are coming. It's about controlling the borders in general. Maybe wanting to create and improve laws and the justice system when it comes to immigration. Not just looking at someone and going, I don't like them because they don't look like me and they don't speak my language. People in general don't really care about immigration. It's just the fact that when you've got too much of it and it starts to affect your culture and your society, people notice. And if the effects it's having aren't good and cultures are clashing, then people are going to raise the voices about it. And what I would suggest is that you try listening instead of just dismissing people and slapping a label on them. If there was somebody who was coming to work in a coffee shop or was coming to study at a university or was moving a few houses down from you, I could honestly say that most of the people in this country wouldn't have a problem with it. And just to re-stress the earlier point that I made, this is not saying that we don't have criminals from this country and we don't have people in this country who disrespect the law of the land and disrespect the people and things like that. And if somebody did start singling somebody out and victimising them because they were foreign and didn't speak the language, then yes, they're not a very nice person. And I think most people would join me and you in saying that that's not the kind of person who represents the British people. But we don't tarnish all the British people with the same brush, in the same way that you can't tarnish all foreigners and immigrants with the same brush. See, this is something I find quite interesting, is how commentators like James O'Brien, when they talk about immigrants or foreigners, they put them all in one big bracket. But where we're coming from is we're saying that there are lots of different kinds of people who want to come and live here. There are different kinds of foreigners and there are different kinds of immigrants. And we should be able to differentiate between them and talk about the differences between them. We're not the ones putting them all in one box. You are. What Vince Cable and people like James O'Brien clearly miss is the existence of people who wanted to have a conversation about immigration but were constantly shot down and called names and insulted and patronised to, and thus we are where we are. But the thing James doesn't realise is that by insulting people, you're not going to change their mind. You're not even going to offer them different ideas. You're just insulting them, and you're doing it in the safety of your radio studio. It'd be interesting to see if you'd be quite as confident talking to people when you were in the face, or say down the pub, for instance. But we all know James O'Brien doesn't go to the pub. Anywho, I'll be seeing you in part 2.